Hello and welcome to The Entrepreneurs on Monocle Radio, the show all about inspiring people, innovative companies and fresh ideas in global business. Today's programme is a mobility special that takes us from the road to the skies. First, we'll meet the CEO of Swedish EV maker Polestar to hear his optimistic plans for the year ahead.
Being closer to the customer, that will generate more revenue. Our margin will improve because also we have better cars, we have more cars. Bringing all this together will give us the first level of profitability in 25.
And later, we'll hop aboard Greece's first scheduled helicopter airline.
Hospitality and the whole offering around it has been getting more and more upgraded in the last 10 years or so, but transportation still remains a complex issue.
This is The Entrepreneurs with me, Tom Edwards. You're listening to The Entrepreneurs, and there is a focus on mobility on this week's programme. And another special treat for you listeners, Chris Lord is in the studio alongside me. Chris, welcome.
Good to be with you, Tom.
Now, you've been well, you're always a busy man, of course, but you've been particularly busy with some in-the-field reporting. The job you were born to do, Chris. We're going to go to Greece in a moment, but let's start with Polestar. I mentioned at the top of the show, really interesting business, origins on the track, high performance, EVs, Volvo acquisition a decade ago. Now the business is led by Mr. Michael Loescheller, and you went to chat to him. What did you talk to him about, Chris?
Look, it's a really important moment for Polestar. And of course, it's been a mobility special, Tom, at a moment when you were immobile. I
Yes.
stepped in to do some of these interviews and to speak to some of these people that we're going to hear from today. But look, Polestar, a very interesting point. Back in August last year, they started making cars for the first time in a Volvo plant inside America itself, so in South Carolina. They've also currently scouting around, as we'll hear from Michael in a moment, scouting around for a location in Europe to make here in Europe. So a lot of what is happening in that brand and the thinking right now is adjusting to the way the world trade setup has changed in the last few years. As frankly, it's become much harder to make things in Asia, as they started out making all their cars in China and shipping them around the world. Now they're not nearshoring, they're actually shoring their industry and their manufacturing in the markets that they want to reach the most. So, and I started really, I think, with Michael, just asking him a little bit about what the most recent executive order from the White House regarding EVs means for his business.
So in terms of EVs overall, I would say first, EV markets are growing globally. They're growing, not at the linear speed we had hoped for, but they're growing. They're also growing in the US. And I'm actually optimistic because I see what customers want. They want emission-free mobility. They also want to have some excitement. And we do all that with Polestar cars, right? We offer mobility without emissions. We have performance elements. We have an exciting design. We try to put all these things together and highlight this excitement. And I'm sure by doing that, customers will vote for us.
You're right that there is growth there and demand is there, but it is slowing. And I think in certain markets in Germany, in Japan, for example, last year, it was slowing the demand for electric vehicles. I wonder, when there is the kind of rhetoric around these vehicles and the transition that you see, especially at the moment when it's charged up by Elon Musk and Twitter and X and so on, what does that mean for a brand like yours that is frankly pitching itself as a very cool brand, as something that is trying to grasp a design-minded consumer who cares about what the future looks like?
I mean, first of all, you're right. There are markets where the growth is not there, but there are also reasons for it. For example, in Germany, my home country, I mean, if you change incentives from one weekend to the next, well, surprise, surprise, consumers do react to that. But if we go back a few years, like when we talked electrification, everybody was like, oh, what about the range? I mean, isn't that a big topic? Range anxiety, right? I think the Germans even translated that. They called it Reichweitenangst. I've never heard a word like this.
Or a word so German sounding.
Yeah, so now a couple of years later, I mean, look at the Polestar cars. We offer a range of 700 kilometers, so over 500 miles. So nobody talks about that anymore. So I think we need to tackle it step by step. The same with charging infrastructure. Everybody is excited, but also there we see improvements. More and more cars are coming to the market, and they offer more than just electrification, right? So, for example, you look at the Polestar cars, we combine it with software, with innovation. So, yes, while there are lots of topics to work through, I'm optimistic because we have overcome many things. And with every new technology, with every transformation, there are obstacles on the way.
Michael, I want to come to the products that you've got landing on the market imminently, very shortly, new Polestar models about to drive out of various factories around the world. But I want to actually pick up on your story a little bit, because just outline for a little bit your journey from a traditional car maker, the center of the most famous brands in the world. You can talk a bit about that, but also your time then in the US and at the sort of coalface of this innovation. Just talk us through your journey to Polestar a little bit.
Yeah, very happy to do that. So, I mean, I'm in automotive now 24 years. I was with Volkswagen in Germany, but also in the US, obviously one of the real big car companies in the world. I then went to Opel, first as a CFO and then as a CEO. And I would say working for traditional OEMs is very exciting. It's also not that easy because you have a lot of decisions to make. But in general, things are relatively well established. I went then to Vietnam for a short period of time, and then I became the CEO of Nikola in Phoenix, Arizona. We developed fuel cell trucks, electric trucks, also like a startup company. And there, obviously, I learned, okay, if you do things for the first time, it's exciting. You can also do things very well the first time, but a lot of established things are also not there. And when I then arrived this September in Sweden, in Gothenburg with Polestar, I was so delighted to see the Polestar brand is so relevant, focusing on sustainability, on electric cars, but this in a performance-oriented way. And this with really good products, that's a very, very strong basis to start with. And now, obviously, we need to amend things. We change things on the sales side, but just having these products and the brand there, I find very, very exciting. But of course, in a young company, there are lots of things you need to set up, you need to correct, which probably in big traditional companies are there for 20 years already, right? But I feel we have a great opportunity with Polestar to get things right, to try out also new things, and to be faster and better and more relevant for customers.
You know, it's an interesting journey, that, isn't it? Because you start with something that's so much the backbone of German economy and the national story in so many ways. And then obviously you go out to a startup. I wonder, when you then come to a company that's obviously got the backing of it's part of the Volvo family, if you like, it's part of that big structure. But then you've come with all that startup experience of doing something. Nikola, obviously a challenging company. It was doing something very original, still is, which is, as you mentioned, these fuel cell driven trucks, hydrogen fuel cell and also electric driven freight trucks, intending to try and change the way America moves goods around. What is that experience in that startup? Remember, there's a lot of entrepreneurs listening to this, people who are setting out on their own business. What does that startup experience do for you when you then go back into something that's a little bit more of an institution within a country, shall we say?
Yeah, so my experience is when you start something new, you have obviously a lot of ideas, put this into a business model, and then you start executing. But on that way of executing, my experience was it's really important to stay focused. You cannot do, as a young company, everything. And that's also what I like a lot about Polestar. We do electric cars. We do electric performance cars. We are focusing on key segments of the market and try to do this very well. Now, we are already in 28 markets, so that's also a lot. But this focus of things is so important because you can't do everything at the same time. You can't be in all markets, you can't be in all segments, and you can't launch cars at the same time. Be focused, do those things, do them right. And there, of course, we and young companies take risks and can do things faster, and I would also say better than the competition. And needless to say that the automotive industry is going through a very big transformation. And you have the big players, very well established, and then you have players like us, and we are very focused. And I think we will be very successful because we are so focused on few things and get them really right.
You've stated that the target for 2025 is profitability with Polestar. In the climate that we've just been talking about, where there is some skepticism leaking into these people who are defining the conversation, certainly in the US right now, around electric vehicles. Obviously, you've got a competitor over there, very, very high up in the form of Elon Musk with Tesla. But still, there is a skepticism leaking in a little bit from some of these channels. How do you get to profitability this year? How do you keep that momentum that we have seen in other years about excitement around electric cars. How do you keep that going as a brand, do you think, in this year and beyond to get to that goal?
Yeah, so our new business plan, which we also announced last week, foresees a couple of, again, very focused elements. First, it's important for us as a young company that we grow. So we have defined clear growth targets, 30 to 35% over the next 3 years. That will happen because we have now a bigger portfolio. So in the past, we had only the Polestar 2. Now we have a Polestar 3 and Polestar 4 in the market. So more products are helping. But the other thing, back to let's be focused, we do many changes on the sales side. In the past, Polestar was acting through a direct-to-consumer online model. So we were hoping that by displaying cars, people would order, let's say, at home. That is working to a certain extent, but it's not broad enough. So now we, in a way, go back to basics. We go to retail locations where qualified salespeople advise, give you consulting information and say, hey, this is the offer, this is how the car works, and ideally conclude also a deal with you. That's a big change. And back to my prior topic about let's be focused, right? So the cars are coming. We have launched them. Very good first phase of a young company like Polestar. Now going into the next chapter, it's important that we really do well on the sales side. Be closer to the customer and have more locations. And it's not so difficult. So we have today 140 locations where you can buy Polestars. We will increase this to 200 by the end of this year and 300 by the end of 26. It's not complicated. Stay focused on this, being closer to the customer. That will generate more revenue. Our margin will improve because also we have better cars. We have more cars with better margins. And then, yes, the reality of a second phase of a startup or young company is also efficiency, cost reduction, optimization. Bringing all this together will give us the first level of profitability in 25.
It's interesting because, when you talk then about going back to basics or back to retail, of course, you're not talking about the forecourt, are you? You're not talking about big, the old dealerships of old. I've been to many of the Polestar retail spaces. They are interesting. They are a boutique, if you will, for want of a better term. It's wrong to call them a showroom because there's a little bit more to it than that in a way. I just wonder, listening to this, so people start thinking about what that looks like and how you reach a kind of consumer these days. The retail space for someone working in a luxury item, what does that need to do to get people excited? We were just talking about momentum around electric vehicles, and I appreciate you were just talking about getting to profitability. But when we come back to this question of keeping the momentum and excitement around electric vehicles, how do you need to shape retail to make that work?
Yeah, first of all, I think let's be pragmatic, let's be straightforward. To your point, dealerships in the past, lots of requirements from OEMs like, okay, here are the 700 pages, what you need to fulfill. That is not what customers are looking for. I think it's important, obviously, to experience the car, also to test drive them in a location which is easy to get to. And then really have qualified people outlining to you, okay, what can the product do? Technology is really advanced in these days. How do you do software updates? I mean, our cars have core compute. You can do software updates. That's great, but it's good to explain it. I mean, how is the ADAS working? How is the Google built-in working? All these needs explanation, and I think it's really important that you have salespeople doing that. And then I would say make the customer experience as easy as possible, right? Therefore, we also have decided not being in the city centers where it's difficult to get, but going to locations where it's easy to get there, then experience the car, because test drive, experience the car, that in most cases really is the purchase decision to say, yes, I want this or not. And that's what we try to do, keep it simple.
Look, there are new products landing imminently. I mean, you've got the Polestar 3, as you mentioned, is now being manufactured in the US, and I want to talk to you a little bit about the manufacturing, the way Polestar makes these cars, but also the Polestar 7 is moving into production in Europe, as I understand it, and that is going to be an SUV style model. Just start to talk us through that. What's the experience of that car, and what does it bring that's new here? And I think, when we start talking about SUVs, even though it's maybe a compact SUV, again, can you get that kind of range that people, frankly, will expect from a sports utility vehicle like that they will want to go out and be confident they can go out in the wild as they would with their SUV?
So we have made the decision to do the Polestar 7, and now we are wrapping up certain details, and we will make the final decision where exactly we produce the Polestar 7 in about 2 to 3 months. We have decided it will be in Europe exactly for those reasons. So no tariffs, and also like shipping cars around the world is not a future business model, really. I mean, being close where your customers are, also fast then to market, is a benefit. That's why we clearly decided it will be in Europe. And we, Polestar, do well in Europe. And in Europe, I mean, size of the car is also a topic. Our cars in general are relatively big, which is good for China and the US, but for Europe, it's really beneficial to have a smaller, a compact SUV. And also to the point of, I want to be in the places where the big profit pools are. The compact SUV segment is a big segment and is the fastest growing segment. So back to basics. Why don't we go into the segment where the biggest profit pool is? And that is certainly the compact SUV. And I think a premium compact SUV in this segment can play a very interesting role, because at the moment we don't see so many others positioned like this. That's the thought process. No rocket science. It's pretty straightforward. As entrepreneurs, business people think, go where the profits are, where you have growth, and where you can make a quick impact.
Polestar has come of age, if you like, in a very interesting period of economics, global economics, in a sense that when you started out as a brand, you were manufacturing largely in China. And that was where the most of the cars that came to market were starting their lives. Then we had, obviously, the Trump presidency, number one, and we had tariffs on Chinese-made vehicles, and things had to start changing tack. Then we had the talk of nearshoring and friendshoring and getting closer. I just wondered now, you guys are sort of leaping to the next bit, which is say, well, rather than be near the markets that we want to sell to, we need to be in the markets we need to sell to. And so, of course, you have your US plant is online now in South Carolina. Was this ever, as you understand it, and I appreciate you've only come on in September, Michael, but as you understand things, was this always part of the plan, or is this essentially how brands and businesses are having to change? I mean, I think there's that, is this a push and a pull, or was this ever part of the plan?
Well, this has developed over time. In fairness, like when Polestar was founded, EVs was a big topic, very few competitors, and everybody was like super excited. Okay, here's the Polestar 2, which is a very successful car. More than 170,000 Polestar 2s have been sold. That's a big achievement for a company which is so young as Polestar. But then things have developed, right? I mean, tariffs came in, more models, and therefore the manufacturing strategy we have is very important. It's very intelligent to produce locally in the US. Now with the Polestar 7 also in Europe, but we also produce in Korea the Polestar 4 for the US and at a later stage also for Europe. Why do we do that? Because it's without tariffs, right? So, I mean, these things do develop over time. In fairness, we are living in a time where you have lots of changes, and the automotive industry is always right in the middle of all the changes, be it a new president in the US, be it changes everywhere. But I think we have found very good solutions, and for me, it's always important, are those robust setups, right? I mean, are they also working when times get more difficult? And I feel we have made good solutions.
Your old company, Volkswagen, is doing interesting stuff in terms of the people that it's working with right now. And it's fostered a lot of startups, frankly. Rivian being one of them, Scout Motors on the east coast of the US, both of whom are essentially building software for Volkswagen in most cases. That's essentially the interest that Volkswagen has. Just help me understand, someone who's seen every side of this cube, if you like, the old OEMs, the old big manufacturers, the legacy brands, where do you see that they sit these days in this EV question, if you like? That in a way they're having to look to upstarts to teach them to do, in a sense, what's the most basic thing, which is the programming, aren't they?
Yeah, and now we need to talk a bit about software because it's so important in the car industry. And I need to do a 30-second advertising for Polestar because the Polestar 3 really has the first software-defined vehicle. And why is that important? Because you can do then over-the-air updates. And that is really what I think some other competitors in the US and China have done. The Europeans are behind. And I'm so happy that we can do it because customers are delighted about this. So you drive a Polestar 3, you get the notice like, okay, please do the over-the-air update. The next day you feel your car has improved. You love it. And you actually got this for free, but you know your company is taking care of you. And I think this is the future. And even if there are things you want to improve from the company point of view, you can do that in a very easy way. That's, I think, really the future. Everybody else will do that. And the European competitors you mentioned will do the same. But it's also fair, and it's my role also to highlight that Polestar has it already today with the Polestar 3, which is a competitive advantage. And we want to make sure that people understand it and really say, oh, the Polestar 3 has really the core compute. It is a software-defined vehicle where I can do these over-the-air updates, which I think is really exciting and really makes the product better and the customer happier.
So, we've talked about your manufacturing that's happening in the US. You've also got plans for a European manufacturing base for the Polestar 7 to be confirmed where that will be. But also, we've touched on your huge expansion of retail spaces by 2026. You're also going to start selling in France in 2025, aren't you? Even a frankly tricky moment for France's economy.
Yeah, that's correct. And back to the point of focus. We want to enter new markets, and we will, but 2025 is all about France. Why are we very optimistic about that? First of all, the EV market in France is relatively big. We understand Europe very well. We have very competent French management. Now we're looking for French retail partners. We have all the processes there, and Polestar is really doing well in Europe. So therefore, this year, the focus is really on France, making sure we have a successful launch with our new products. And then 2026 onwards, we will look at other markets. But again, let's not do everything at the same time. We are very focused 2025 on the French market introduction.
And would you ever consider making these cars, these Polestar 7s, in Western Europe, in an old manufacturing base like France?
I mean, look, in these days, it's not so difficult to find factory capacity which is available. I think bringing all the elements together, like the platform, the cost competitiveness, and we will announce that final decision in 2 to 3 months. And as I said, it's an important long-term investment decision.
That was Michael Loescheller, the CEO of Polestar, talking to our Chris Lord a little bit earlier. And you can find out more about the business and their exciting plans for 25 and beyond by heading to polestar.com. You're listening to The Entrepreneurs with me, Tom Edwards, and also with me, Chris Lord, still gathered around the Studio One table here at Midori House. Chris,
great to be with you, Tom. I'm glad to see you back in fighting form after your time away.
Yes, exactly. It was a jolly couple of weeks. Listen, we're on the road, as we so often are at Monocle. We've been talking EVs, of course, on the highways, but now we're looking to the skies and we're heading to Greece, which might surprise some. Super interesting business, lots of innovation here. Tell me about this next mobility interview, Chris, that you did.
Hopper is a really interesting hop-on, hop-off helicopter company operating around the islands of Greece. Famously, Greece is a country with many charms that exist well off the beaten track. And one of the challenges of getting around that country is, you either have to get on a ferry, which can be slow and quite often quite costly, even though you're only going quite relatively a short distance, or you take planes, which means you have to go through the rigor of going through domestic travel, going to an airport, all that kind of thing. Hopper are trying to corner what is I think, a changing travel picture for a lot of people, where they're willing to spend a little bit more to get rid of some of the rigors that we've come associated with, especially when it comes for short-haul domestic journeys. Get rid of some of the rigors that we've come to know so well of, taking your shoes off at security, having to undress when you want to just get into the departure lounge, all those kind of things. You can be very quick on your helicopter and off you go in a very, very short period of time. And so I spoke to the Chief Commercial Officer, Dimitris Kosofas, just about why this business has got its moment up in the air right now.
So essentially what we've seen as a paradox in the tourism space in Greece in the last few years is that hospitality and the whole offering around it has been getting more and more upgraded in the last 10 years or so, but transportation still remains a complex issue. I think that for most islands, you'd need at least a 3 to 4 hours ferry ride, or if you're lucky for one of them to have an airport, then you can get there in an hour's time. But then again, some of them also entail a complex trip involving both a ferry and an airplane ride.
And so I look at your destination, your route map right now. You're obviously going from Athens, but also you're heading as far as to Mykonos, to Patmos, to Potroheli, to Santorini. You've got an expanding route map all across these islands. But in a way, what you've
brought to the table of travel there in Greece right now is it's about making it accessible at almost a sort of private jet level accessibility without the big cost. Is that right?
Absolutely. Affordability was indeed one of the key factors we identified very early on in the process. Dimitris, our CEO and second-time founder, he essentially, saw the gap in the market on his way actually to Patmos on a trip. He was attending a wedding. And there was an opportunity there, getting the sharing economy working for us and making helicopter travel accessible. And essentially, just to give you more context, what is happening is that private flights on helicopters have been operating for a few years in Greece, as everywhere else in the world. But what happens there is that most of the times you would see that one of the two legs of the trip is actually coming back with a helicopter empty. So we made a bold move trying to get that helicopter trip, the empty leg, as we call it in the industry, to make it as full as possible so that we can make the economics work. And that's how we launched the innovative model of shared helicopter rides from Athens to the Greek islands as a starter, and potentially, expanding to further places abroad, and we'll see in the future.
Now, it's interesting, you talk there about making it more affordable, but I think for most people listening to this, they will think of helicopter rides as, frankly, an exclusive way to travel. Can really you keep the cost down simply by flying full helicopters? Is that just the way you can keep costs down? How else can you make this accessible? I'm looking at some of your one-way fares. They go from around 160 to 350 euros, which, frankly, is not worlds away from what you'd pay for a typical domestic flight. So how on earth can you keep it that low?
Well, it's all a matter, it's a combination of how many seats on a helicopter you can fill based on, how you price the service. And I think, it's still early days, but we're finding the right sweet spot that makes sense for both customers as well as the business. And from what we've seen from the first few months of operation, because we only launched in May 2024, but, having transported a few hundreds of passengers in the last few months, we see that pricing, especially for travelers coming from abroad, is very appealing. As you said, when you have an average price for an Athens to Mykonos route at around 300 euros per person per way, that is definitely something that you would need to consider if you are trying to save for time and for comfort. Because if you think about it, you show up at the heliport just 20 minutes prior to the departure time, and you're greeted by our staff, and after a brief safety instructions summary, you're off to the air. And then when you land, it's probably around 30 to 40 minutes later, and you're in destination, and it's great. You feel great. And you're off to your final destination, be it the accommodation, hotel, property, or whatever. So the feedback that we've been getting from all of that experience is amazing, and is one of the key factors that we base ourselves against so that we make sure that we grow in the right manner.
Well, you raise an interesting point there because, as you mentioned earlier, this is still a relatively young business. May 2024, you started getting up in the air. I just wonder, how does this grow? Because, it is costly to run these helicopters. It is, you've got to get them full to make this business model work. So how do you grow this as time goes on? Is it about adding destinations, or is it about expanding the fleet? What does the next few years look like?
Yeah, very good question. And obviously we're blessed to have the capital in order to invest until we get to the break-even point. But, even as of the time that we launched and now, we have grown our flight network from 10 destinations to 15. And that actually spans to more than 80 routes, if you consider that. And we expanded also the fleet from 2 helicopters that we were using around summer 2024 to 6 helicopters that we will have by this coming March. And accordingly, obviously, the team has also expanded. We started with around 15 people. Now we're more than 25. So you do have an interesting mix where you actually need to get the economics of the business right as far as occupancy is concerned, pricing, as well as the flight network, but also make sure that you invest enough in the team and all of the processes behind it. And I think that's where some of the experience, both from a business standpoint as well as from a flight operations standpoint, actually comes in. On the business side, especially with the experience that our founder, Dimitris Memos, brings to the table, this is something that we use on a daily basis and tap onto because we have to make every little process as efficient as possible and, as best for the customer. But then on the flight operations side, we were lucky enough to acquire one of the operators that was hosting private flights in Greece for the past 4 years. And with that came a lot of expertise around not only flights, but also maintenance, safety, and what have you. So that combination, I think, was very important in terms of launching right and launching fast.
Dimitris, one of the criticisms that a lot of semi-private carriers come under, and private jets, of course, is that, it does come down to that question of efficiency and resources and the fact that, when we do put a plane in the air that's got, hundreds of people on it going from one destination to another, yes, it uses a huge amount of fuel, but also you get a lot of people from one place to the other. Just address that if you can, because, in your helicopters, obviously, you're working with limited numbers of people who you can get on there, but it still requires a lot of fuel to get a helicopter up in the air. I mean, how do you square that?
So it does, and it's still early days, but the vision is that we actually transition to the electric vehicles for takeoff and landing pretty soon. So sustainability is definitely on our agenda. And even though it's very small steps that we can make as of year one, I think that, we have it on the roadmap. We are actually in contact with some of the operators and the manufacturers around the eVTOLs. And it's definitely something we are keen to actually bring into Greece because we are already exploring that. Obviously, it takes time and innovation. Also, when you think about the equipment and all of the helicopter business, that's slower than what we would like. But we see the race as far as different manufacturers is concerned very active. And we do believe that we will soon have a solution on that and hopefully we'll bring that to Greece.
You've got 5 Robinson R44s and R66s. I mean, have you explored the world of potentially turning them into electric-powered helicopters down the line?
I'm not sure, even though Robinson is indeed in discussion with some of the, the people around the technology around electricity is concerned. I think that it would probably need to be a different manufacturer, to be honest. That's not an area that, we publicly talk about that much. But then again, I think that it is safe to assume that we are sustainability driven because nowadays, especially in the travel space, it is one of the important factors that even a customer would actually choose a brand over another. So we do take that seriously.
Just on that note, and I think because people will be hearing that and wondering, when you address that for me, because, a lot of people listening to this will say, yeah, but this is essentially a private flight. Can you really say that it's more sustainable to put people in the air on a helicopter than it is hundreds of them on one flight?
Well, to be honest, especially if you compare that with the ferry service, the footprint, the carbon footprint that a ferry leaves is actually, much, much higher than the one that a helicopter does. Now, when it comes to airplanes, then that's more comparable. But as I said, we're still early days, and I think that there are lots to be done, not only on our end, but I think holistically in the market. And I think that we've seen some of the places leading the race, and I'm mostly thinking about the Middle East and Dubai, where they are already operating some test flights and some public flights. But I think we'll see more and more of that in Europe as of even this year.
And Dimitris, when you look across the landscape of Greece, it is a country where its tourism seasons ebb and flow over the years. There is a clear high season, a clear low season. You get a mixture of weathers, which I'm sure makes operating your helicopters sometimes quite challenging. What do you do as a business to manage that rhythm, if you like, across the year, where frankly you just do not have many people traveling to the islands?
We have seen in the last few years the season being widened more and more every year. But obviously, as you said, it does leave a few months where we have decreased activity. The flight schedule and the frequencies is a bit decreased. However, there are opportunities both in the private flight space as well as on other corporate packages that we have launched for some of the companies here in Greece, because there is a lot of activity, for example, in the construction space, as far as the islands are concerned, over the winter months. So there are a lot of companies that need to tend to business, even on a same day trip, and need to get to Antiparos to oversee a building, a villa that is getting built or what have you, and then come back in the afternoon. So that's helping a lot. And then also, lastly, we do some sightseeing tours around Athens that can also appeal to travelers that nowadays visit Athens throughout the year.
Now, Hopper is obviously very Greece-focused right now, but you did mention earlier about the Middle East and opportunities out there and thinking about what ways that part of the world can be better connected with these kind of operations. Are you looking now to potentially getting international with this, getting outside of Greece and taking Hopper overseas?
It is in the cards. Maybe destinations with similar terrain that the one has in Greece, with a lot of different islands and, remote destinations. I don't know, Spain or Croatia, potentially also Italy. But in general, we do think about how we can replicate the model and get that abroad, because obviously it's very important for us to keep on expanding and keep on growing. It's something to watch out for. Obviously, we want to make sure that we address Greece in the right manner that it deserves, because there are so many different islands and destinations that you could cover. We operate all year round, and there's definitely, in addition to the islands, a lot of other small destinations around the mountains. And I know that, Monocle has been doing a great work with our tourism board trying to showcase those. And I think that, that can also come into play quite soon.
And that was Dimitris Kosfas, the co-founder and CCO of Hopper. You can find out more about the business by heading to flyhopper.com. My thanks to Chris Lord for joining me this week and for all his reporting for this week's programme. But that's it for this episode of The Entrepreneurs. We'll be back at the same time next week. Do look out for some Eureka moments, available every Friday. The programme was produced by Laura Kramer with audio editing by Jack Dewars. You can listen again and find out more about the show at monocle.com. That's where you can subscribe to Monocle magazine and read more about better businesses every month. You can always follow us and catch up with the archive wherever you get your audio. If you want to contact the team, do email Laura on lrk@monocle.com. I'm Tom Edwards. Goodbye, and thanks for listening to The Entrepreneurs.